On November 10th, the Centaur record label released a CD that features the fantastic American cellist Sophie Shao. Called CanCan Macabre, this disc features works from the cello repertoire, such as Debussy's beautiful cello sonata and the third movement to Chopin's cello sonata. But the recording also features new music written by composers Herschel Garfien and Thomas Addis. Rounding out the disc is music by Couperin that's been arranged for cello by Paul Bazzalare. For those unfamiliar with Sophie Shao, she has taken top prizes at the Tchaikovsky and Rostropovich cello competitions. She has performed as soloist with the Houston Symphony Orchestra, the National Symphony Orchestra of Taiwan, the National Symphony Orchestra of Ukraine, and the Pacific Symphony. She has performed at prestigious festivals throughout the US, such as the Marlborough Festival and the Chamber Music Northwest, and has been on faculty at Vassar College in New York and Princeton. Currently, she is assistant professor of cello at the University of Connecticut's School of Music. And joining me here over Zoom to talk about her latest release, CanCan Macabre, I am joined by Sophie Shao. Hi, Sophie. Nice to meet you here over Zoom.
Thank you. Nice to meet you too, Chris.
Mm. Before we get to the CD, one of the things I have to ask about is your cello. You play on an instrument that was formerly owned by the great Pablo Casals. And I also know how much you love Bach. I know you actually gave a lecture on why Bach is still relevant in the 21st century. Casals, of course, being very often credited with the person who brought the cello suites to the forefront of the cello rep with his very famous recording. Do you know if he performed the suites on that cello? And if so, does that for you have any extra significance?
I actually don't know if he performed it on his cello. He likely played some Bach on it. This was his second instrument.
Mm,
He had a Bergonzi Gefriller, which I think they consider a Gefriller now, which was his primary instrument. And I think he kept this one in the States. So he has photos with it from Puerto Rico. So yeah, I mean, when I first got the instrument, I felt like it sounded like him. I really do think wood, basically the cello body is an acoustic amplifier,
mm.
and it vibrated at the frequencies, like it loosens at the frequencies that he plays at. So it actually did have his sound. Like over time, I think it's actually changed. I think I have a lighter style than Casal's, but I definitely feel his presence in it.
Perfect. Your recording CanCon Macabre is really great. On the disc, you've got the Debussy Sonata and the Herschel Garfien piece, Layers. My understanding is that Layers was commissioned by you, and you wanted a companion piece to go alongside the Debussy Sonata. Can you talk about how that commission came about, and can you tell us about how you met Herschel Garfien?
Mhm, sure. The commission came about because a friend of mine, after a recital I played, said, I would like to commission a piece for you. I'd like to pay for a commission. And so, of course, that was gratefully accepted by me, and I got to choose which composer I asked. And I had played for the Five Boroughs Music Festival as a freelance cellist, and they're based in New York City, and it's called Five Boroughs after the Five Boroughs of New York.
Mm,
So I was asked to play this concert where they were celebrating their commissions over the years from all the composers, and I met some wonderful composers that way, including Jesse Montgomery. And I loved the piece that I played by Herschel Garfien called Cyclone.
mm.
It just was so exuberant and it had so much like visceral energy, and it was just thrilling. And so I approached him about a commission and he was really happy.
Perfect, perfect. Layers is based on a poem of the same name by Stanley Kunitz. I read it when I was prepping for the interview. It is super moving. This whole idea of carrying on in life despite friends falling away, milestones sort of slipping into the horizon. Can you talk about that piece and how the three movements relate to the poem?
Sure. So The piece I knew would be connected to a literary theme because that has been Herschel's MO with previous pieces that he's written. And he chose the layers. I didn't know about it when he was working on it. But it's a wonderfully philosophical work. I think previous music by Herschel has also reflected kind of a mature understanding, kind of the difficulties of aging
Mm,
emotionally. And so this one is included in that kind of, as you said, like looking back at a long lived life where a lot of the pain comes from the joy that we've had because it's no longer with us. The first movement is called Scavenger Angels, and it kind of puts uh, against each other the cruelty of scavengers with the benevolence of angels. And so there's this like really heart-wrenching theme in the cellos, and then a lighter second theme that is woven together to create that movement. And the second movement is the poet hearing a voice through nimbus-covered clouds, um, kind of a dark, hazy, like affect.
mm,
And then the last movement is celebratory. It uses klezmer tunes. Herschel has a Jewish background.
mm,
And it's usually played on life's happiest occasions, but the tonality of the music itself has sadness in it. So the piece is definitely kind of nostalgic, but in a very mature, accepting kind of way for the fullness of a life experience.
And it's very beautiful and very effective. Um, one of the things I found interesting about the Scavenger Angels movement, the first movement, is like it's almost like the scavengers win out. The dissonance sort of takes over, right? Hmm.
It swoops in, yeah, lots
Hmm.
of dissonances.
Yeah. The other work on the other new work on the disc is Thomas Addis's piece Lieu Retrouvé for Places Found. It was written for Stephen Isserlis. Can you talk about how he portrays the water, the mountains, the field, and the village in that piece?
Sure. Yeah, it's really inventive compositional techniques. The first movement is very much like a Debussy image, but of course, all Addis,
Hmm.
where you can hear like falling water, and it's very gentle at first, and then it starts to swirl. It gets kind of agitated, and then it dissipates at the end. The
Hmm.
second movement is called the mountain. And so there are two mountaineers you can hear, one in the piano and one in the cello. And you can hear them all ascending this craggy mountain, but at different kind of rhythms and I mean, the same tune is there, but he pits us in like different meters.
Yeah,
Um,
it almost sounds like there's two different pieces of music happening at the same time, but they're not. They're very much related. Yeah.
Yeah, that's how he plays with yeah, the two different characters, but like you just like two superimposed meters as you say. I mean, I look at my friends and we all kind of work at little different tempos. You know, we're like all in our little world, and I think that's a wonderful portrayal of it. And so it's like very craggy and difficult. To ascend, and it
Mhm.
ends with like this firm planting of a flag. Um, Stephen Isserlis in the liner notes said that he was worried something else had happened, but it was just, you know, a victory at the end. And the slow movement is called The Fields, and it's just very quiet, very spare, very calm, and the extended technique in this movement is just how high it goes at the end. The cello, previous to Thomas Addis, like did not play in that register. You barely have any room, so it really feels like all this like wafting into the air. And then the last movement is just this romp where everything that you could go wild in a town is involved in this last movement, the CanCan Macabre. And he uses crazy extended techniques for the cello that are just really difficult. Artificial harmonics, which by themselves are not that difficult, but like they're just
Yeah.
all over the place and hard to find. And then again, like he uses like crazy slides off the end of the instrument. So yeah, it's just wild
And there is a little bit of that Offenbach can in that final movement as
for
well, right?
sure.
There's hints of that as well.
Hmm.
Thomas Addis, he's English.
Hmm.
Do you know the significance to the why he titled it everything in French, the movements in French, and the title of the piece?
So, I mean, that's why the music of Couperin is there, and because I think he was highly influenced by almost everything. He's
Mm,
an omnivore for sure, musically, but highly influenced by the French style, and so French Baroque and Offenbach.
plays a role. Speaking of all things French, you've got these five pieces on concert by Couperin that have been arranged by, help me out with the pronunciation, Paul Bazelaire. Am I saying that
Hmm.
right?
Very good. Yes.
Bazelaire. Uh, this is music that was originally written for viols. What needed to happen in order to get this music to work for the cello?
He probably had to choose a register, a range, a key that worked for the cello. But I think they're similar enough in in all things that it would end up working for the
Mm,
cello. Yeah, and he also transcribed it from viols, like all viols, to cello and piano.
yeah,
So
it's one of the things that I was thinking about when I was listening to it. You think cello and you think it's music that comes from viola da gamba, you might think that the piano might be used as sort of a continual instrument, but he doesn't treat the piano like that. It's very much a partnership between the two instruments, right?
for sure, yes.
Hmm. Debussy Sonata is also on the CD, and it's part of this six sonata project that Debussy wanted to compose. He didn't finish it though. I was doing some reading about this, and apparently the publisher Durand wanted Debussy to compose a sonata as a sort of a tribute to Couperin and Rameau. Debussy himself considered himself very much a French musician. And then on the CD, you've got these Couperin pieces right before the Debussy. Was that intentional? Had you planned that?
I knew that I wanted them to work together. I didn't know how well, like even the key relationship kind of worked from piece to piece. So yeah, I was pleased that there was such a strong relationship that even didn't realize was there.
Yeah. Um, he only completed three sonatas from the set of six that he wanted to compose: the violin sonata, and then there's a sonata for flute, viola, and harp. For me, of the three sonatas, the cello sonata is probably the most progressive. Can you talk about some of the things that he asks of the cellist in this sonata?
Well, what's really interesting about the WC Sonata is that it's in typical sonata form. Like it's a very standard kind of Mozart, Haydn type form that was like kind of codified. I wouldn't say that word, it's a little too strong, but the structure was there. But he was able to take the form and like make a clear narrative through it.
Mm,
Um, he kind of talked about how uh, he titled the piece Pierrot Angry at the Moon, and that is referring to a fictional character, Pierrot Lunaire,
yeah,
who people would mime. And he basically, in the introduction, like wakes up with a start. You can hear the beginning. It's a sudden yum, ba-dee-da.
yeah,
He just wakes up, and then there's like periods of like where he isn't awake yet. And right mid movement, it sounds like a whole bunch of church bells, like just clanging around, and you hear him like in between, kind of getting struck. And by the end of the movement, like he's awake. The
yeah,
second movement and the finale, the second movement is called Serenade, and it's him serenading the moon. And he has all these antics to try to charm the moon into loving him. And it's really interesting because if you just think about it, the moon light does look like, well, the moon looks like it's following you around.
mm,
during the night. So like, when you walk around, there's the moon. So it appears to be interested. And so by the end of the movement, he finds out, nothing's going to happen between them. So the last movement is a song of liberty.
Hmm. One of the things that struck me about the CD was the cello and the piano sound just fantastic. Uh, when did the recording happen? And can you talk a little bit about the recording process with Centaur Records?
Sure. The recording happened actually quite a while ago. It took some editing time. So it was like a little pre-COVID.
Hmm.
Um, the the recording happened in actually just a room next to the engineer's studio in his house.
Wow.
And it's actually a very dry space. So he was able to put it through a machine that kind of puts you in a concert hall. It has settings for the kind of reverb that certain halls would give it. So that was a lot of fun to kind of hear the different sounds that he was able to create. It needs to be in a dry space for the best editing purposes because you have a lot of room to like not have the sound bleed over and
Yeah.
vibrations from previous notes hanging over to the next thing. So it was wonderful work with the engineer and producer Adam Abe's house.
Fantastic. Your pianists on the recording are super excellent. You've got Adrian Kim, and help me out with the pronunciation of this next one. Aiva, go ahead.
Yokubavichute.
Oh, yeah.
Lithuanian. She's Lithuanian. And actually, for Lithuanians, different members of the family have different endings to that. So
Uh-huh.
Yokuba means like, family of Jacob. And then I think it means like daughter of. So they
Yeah.
all have slightly different endings.
Mhm. How do you know them, and how long have you been collaborating with them?
Um, Yeva, I've been playing with since she had a piano trio called Trio Cavatina. The violinist is now in the Takash Quartet,
Mm,
but the cellist at that point was having a baby, and they had me come in and sub for them. So I got to play a lot of concerts with her early on in a piano trio fashion, and it was a wonderful connection. And so I kept playing with her after that as a recital partner. Adrienne Kim I met because of the Chamber Music Society of Lincoln Center Young Artist Program. It was called Chamber Music Society 2, and now it's called the Bowers Program. But there was a group of us that were selected to kind of just play concerts alongside the artists of the Chamber Music Society of Lincoln Center. So we then played a lot together. Yeah, I think it's really important to actually have a period of time to work with them
mm,
because then you learn about each other because
yeah,
nobody is ever a complete match in the beginning. You learn
yeah,
who they
totally,
are. Yeah.
totally. So I'm going to wrap up the question by asking, university here in Canada is just wrapping up. They're just finishing up their final exams. You're on faculty at the University of Connecticut. I think American universities are done by now. Am I correct in that?
This is our last week of school.
Mm. What plans do you have for the summer?
Well, I'm going to a couple of music festivals, one near Boston, one in San Luis Obispo. But I have a lot of free time that I'll start editing a second recording that
Nice.
has been kind of hiding out for a while. Um, and yeah, I just learned today that I got tenure.
Nice.
So I was
Bravo.
hoping to relax a little bit.
Great. Sophie,
Thank
your
you.
recording, CanCan Macabre is just fantastic. It has been so great to have the opportunity to talk to you about it. Thanks so much for being so generous with your time and talking to me with me today. This has just been great. Thanks again.
Thanks for having me on your show, and thanks for your interest in my work.